Good afternoon. Welcome to Broadband Breakfast for Lunch. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. Happy to welcome you to this special event at Clyde's of Gallery Place. We are kicking off our series, a four-part series on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and making sure that people are prepared for what is coming in terms of broadband investments and broadband infrastructure and broadband equity, access, and deployment. I just want to make sure, are we able to hear? Is this all coming through? I had, of course, a request out for that. Please let us know if there's any difficulty in hearing us so that we can make sure. Okay, very good. So just to kind of step back and reminder before I introduce our guests, who we're very happy to have with us here at Clyde's of Gallery Place, we have been doing Broadband Breakfast live online every Wednesday for the past 2 years. We're coming up on that 2-year mark next week with the start of the pandemic. It was the COVID-19 pandemic that prompted us to bring this community together through these weekly gatherings on topics ranging from broadband's access, deployment, how the network was handling, changing traffic patterns and so forth. And we have been doing this ever since as a way to connect us virtually. Of course, those of you in Washington may have known, and certainly we have these articles and records available. We used to do an event here called the Broadband Breakfast Club right here at Clyde's of Gallery Place. And so we wanted to start this up again now that we're starting to have in-person availability. And we just figured it would be a little early for those out in the West Coast if they were to do a broadband breakfast at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. So we changed and made Broadband Breakfast for Lunch. And so on the second Wednesday of each month, so April 13th, May 11th, June 8th, mark it on your calendars. We will be here at Clyde's of Gallery Place at the same time, and of course, live streaming. So those of you who aren't able to make it are also able to participate, and hopefully in an equal footing. Today, it'll just be my guests and myself, but normally we are able to welcome in panelists remotely, and that has happened several times before. And I'm also pleased to announce that next month on April 13th, we'll be having Alan Davidson, the administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And we also look forward to welcoming Christopher McLean, the acting administrator of the Rural Utility Service, as well as other players in the broadband space. You know, the other thing I just wanted to mention is that we are extremely grateful for the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast that enable us to do these programs, particularly today for Broadband.Money. Broadband.Money is the co-host of this special event that we're doing here today. Clyde, shout out to Mike Floon here with us. Thank you for being here. And we're also wanting to make sure those of you who watch our programs on Broadband Breakfast visit Broadband.Money and discuss.broadband.money. Links are available at Broadband Breakfast. You can find those in order to learn more about the tools that are available to you who are preparing to apply for Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So Broadband Money, big shout out to them. We also do a bi-weekly Ask Me Anything program. And later this week, we'll be featuring Claude Aiken, the CEO of the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association. So looking forward to that event on Friday. Other sponsors of Broadband Breakfast include Utopia Fiber, Broadband Now, Lit Communities, Positron Access, Lightbox, Render Networks, Powerhouse Management, California Emerging Technology Fund, and Samsung. Thank you to each of you. Well, without much further ado, let me welcome our guest. Edjael Casaperalta is the Senior Policy Advisor in the Rural Utilities Service. RUS is, of course, known to many of our participants, our audience, because of its critical role in getting broadband to those most rural areas. And we'll look forward to learning a lot more about RUS from Edjael. Casa Peralta is an attorney, and she's worked with indigenous and underrepresented communities in telecommunications matters. As a senior policy advisor at Rural Utility Service, she's working very closely on all of these matters. She hails from Elsa, Texas, a small border town. You see, touch one button and things go astray.
That's right.
She hails from Elsa, Texas, a small border town on the Rio Grande Valley, and has worked in the past with as a project manager for Amarend, which I understand to be the only 100% tribally owned insurance provider. So if you're able, would love to learn more about the work you've done with Native Americans and making sure that broadband capacity is increased. So Edgel, welcome to Broadband Breakfast for Lunch. Tell us a little bit about how you at the U.S. Department of Agriculture are looking at and approaching the step up in spending on broadband matters.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Drew, for inviting us and inviting USDA to this conversation. As you know, the Department of Agriculture is the only agency that's really focused on closing the digital divide in rural communities. And we have been doing this work for a very long time, right? The Rural Utility Service is the successor to the Rural Electrification Administration. And so in the 40s, our agency started providing critical infrastructure, basic infrastructure in rural America and in rural communities. Like I said, we started first with electrification. The Rural Utility Service also funds and offers funding for water and waste management projects. We have a slate of water programs, and we also have a slate of broadband programs. So one of the things that we are doing is continuing the mission that we've had that created us. It's focusing on the most remote, rural and unserved communities in the United States.
So could you tell us a little bit about the history of RUS broadband programs? My recollection is that you always have been doing telecommunications, that is to say, electrification first, telecommunications followed that, and then it was devoted specifically to broadband beginning, I can't remember, 03, 04.
Yeah, I believe that it was in 2000 when our first broadband program started.
Yes.
But I believe that it was in the 50s when we started providing service for telephone, providing support for telephone service. But we entered the realm of broadband, I think it was around 2000 when one of our rural broadband programs started, and now we have 5 different programs dedicated to broadband in rural communities.
So how about the Reconnect program? How has that changed RUS's broadband work?
Yeah, the Reconnect program, expanded the work that we could do with to support rural communities. So it was launched, it was created by Congress as a pilot program in 2018. And since then we have received funding in appropriations every, annually, several few $1 million have been awarded to the program. So we're still working as a pilot program, although we're in our 3rd round of funding. We are actually closing that 3rd round today.
Today? Okay, so by closing, you mean to say there will be...
The competition is closing. So anyone out there in the audience or communities submitted.
Too late.
Well, maybe they just press send, submit, and that's right. So we're very excited to be in this 3rd round of Reconnect. And in this 3rd round, we're offering the most funding we've ever offered, which is $1.15 billion in funding to support infrastructure projects in rural communities.
So let me just get you to repeat that. That was a very big number, 1.15
billion.
Now, I mean, again, there's a lot of billions being spread these days. We're talking about 65 billion from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, 42.5 of which are devoted to the infrastructure, but still 1.15 is nothing to sneeze at.
That's
And
right.
could you just tell us a little bit about what you've learned in the 3 or 4 years since 2018 and since you've started doing the program?
Yeah, I think one of the lessons that USDA has gathered from the last few years of Reconnect is that there's a big interest in rural communities to secure state-of-the-art internet service, and that there are a lot of entities, carriers, electric cooperatives, municipalities, tribes that want to be part of that call to provide internet service in rural communities. So that's the major lesson, is that rural communities are stepping up to serve and close the digital divide, and that we're there to support those efforts.
So, specifically in regards to those efforts, who are the grants to? What are the types of companies or co-ops or nonprofits or governments that are getting Reconnect?
Yeah, Reconnect is a great program. It provides funding. It could be grants, loans, or loan and grant combinations that are available just about to any entity except individuals. So you and I could not apply to Reconnect. But any entity that wants to provide internet service in a rural community of 20,000 people or less can come and request funding. That includes municipalities, rural cooperatives. That includes telecom carriers that have been great participants in the program and have helped us, have helped the success of the program. Municipalities, nonprofits. So it really runs the gamut. We are very consciously encouraging all hands on deck, because that's what it takes to connect rural communities.
So what I know a lot of our listeners are going to be interested in, Jael, is how the USDA is interacting with other agencies that are doing broadband programs. And this is not the only time that the issue comes up, right? There's questions about those areas that have received funding for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund of the Federal Communications Commission, how those areas are going to be impacted. There's also the question of the Treasury Capital Fund or the U.S. Treasury Department's Capital Projects Fund. These are all issues right now where there's literally 4 government agencies, right?
That's right.
Agriculture, Commerce, FCC, and Treasury working in some way on broadband. So how do you at USDA and the RUS work and interact with your colleagues in the federal government?
Well, I want to start by saying that this is a really exciting and promising time for closing the digital divide in our country, and for doing that in rural communities as well. Fortunately, our agencies have had long relationships established of collaboration, and making sure that the funds that are being distributed are building quality infrastructure around our country. And right now, even though USDA is the one agency with the mandate to serve rural America, we shouldn't be the only one. And it's great to see that our federal colleagues are also taking up that role, that are stepping in and providing funding to rural, remote communities and tribal communities. But what we are really excited for as well is that Reconnect has had this funding, and through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're also anticipating $2 billion to come to USDA to continue that mission and to collaborate with our sister agencies. So to your question about how we collaborate, in June of last year, in June of 2021, USDA, the FCC, and NTIA signed an MOU to collaborate on the coordination of the distribution of federal funds. So that's one entry point in which we have been collaborating. We also just have great relationships with our, with our colleagues at our sister agencies. to share data and to coordinate with each other.
Well, and one of the things that USDA has that none of those other agencies have that I'm aware of is you have a kind of an on-the-ground network of people.
That's right.
In rural America. I know from the time that I worked in Illinois in the Partnership for Connected Illinois, one of these state broadband offices, the first version, the extension program of universities and the USDA's field offices were kind of one of the first places to go. Could you talk a little bit about your field offices and how they interact, particularly on RUS and broadband programs?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for that question. At USDA, we take pride in saying that we're the people's department. And one of the ways in which we connect with, with the people and with rural communities is through those state and field offices. So as you pointed, we have offices in every state. We have state directors that represent rural development, which is the mission area where USDA resides. And they are our champions about the various rural development programs for a specific state. Within rural utility service, we also have general field representatives. And these are smaller offices and individuals that build relationships with rural communities. They know the rural telecom carriers, they know the new entities that want to provide internet service. They build that on the ground, person-to-person relationship. And they are the first door to learn, for any entity out there to learn about our US telecommunications programs. I want to highlight, we do have electric general field representatives that are experts in our electric programs, and we have telecom field representatives. So they're an amazing team that makes sure that USDA's work is felt directly and building relationships with rural.
Does every state have an electric and a telecom rep?
I believe we don't have one for every state, but we have them in regions. And I'd be happy to send you the link for all of the, for attendees to see where, who's the GFR for their specific state.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I ask, of course, is that the other players we haven't mentioned yet in this process is the states, right? The state offices, right. Because there are now state broadband offices that are either being stood up or being improved, building off of prior work. And these state officials are going to play a crucial role because in this round of funding under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the vast bulk of the $42.5 billion is going to go to states. And so, for example, in some of the work on Broadband.Money, you can actually see contact information for every state broadband office and every state broadband officer and what they're doing. What kind of connections or interactions are had at JAL between the USDA's field representatives and the state broadband offices? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, that is something that we're open to building those relationships. But I know NTIA has a specific relationship with state offices, and I think that their programs will be directly tied to states. So it makes sense that they have that relationship. And for us, our state offices, represent all the rural development agencies. We have 3 agencies within rural development. The Rural Housing Service, the Rural Business and Cooperative Service, and Rural Utilities, which is where our telecommunications programs are. But we are always looking for ways for our state and GFR's teams to collaborate across, right, and support each other's programs.
Are there other funds besides the ones that Reconnect that we've spoken about for broadband at RUS?
Yes, we have 5 different programs that support telecommunications services in rural communities. We have 4 programs that are more focused on infrastructure and 1 program that focuses on distance learning and telemedicine connectivity, and it's called the Distance Learning and Telemedicine Program. And so that one, it offers grants for projects that, entities in rural communities want to extend distance learning curriculum or telemedicine services. The other 4 programs, we've already discussed Reconnect a little bit. We also have Community Connect, which is a program that allows a community to build internet service in an area that is completely unserved. And the awardee has to provide internet service free of cost for 2 years at a community facility or a community center. So this is a really unique way of engaging with our internet programs, and that is open, maybe a smaller nonprofit would be more interested in Community Connect. And then we have the more larger infrastructure program, which are Reconnect, the Rural Broadband Loan Program, which primarily offers loans, and the Rural Telecommunications Loan Program. So those are typically for larger infrastructure projects to serve rural communities.
And we might come back to the loan question a little bit later on, but I want to kind of move into some more details about Reconnect. Some of the progress that you've shown now that you've closed the 3rd round today, but also in particular, I want to get at, and I don't know if this is a subtle change I've just noticed or if you've made it a formal change. Originally, Reconnect was almost a little bit hobbled by the requirement that 10.1 was considered served, right? 10 megabits down and 1 megabit up was considered served. You only could get funding, as I'm remembering, Edgel, and my memory may be faulty. You could only get funding for an area that wasn't served by 10.1 broadband, which of course is a very low standard. And now what I'm seeing, from the webinars that you've had and several of the reporters who are here in this room, covered those, the emphasis was almost always on high capacity gigabit level service. So could you just talk a little bit about the way you at USDA's RUS are approaching the speed thresholds in broadband deployment?
Yeah, well, we're really excited at RUS to take this leap into the future of rural communities, right? As you mentioned, Reconnect, there is a speed standard by which communities become eligible to receive Reconnect funding. And it was 10/1 in the past. And, for this round of Reconnect, for the 3rd round, acknowledging that the pandemic really clarified for the entire nation the quality of service that is really needed for families, for communities to have meaningful connectivity, right? 10.1 is definitely unserved. 25.3 is definitely unserved. And so now we're looking to the future of connectivity. So for the 3rd round of Reconnect, any community that does not have 100/20 Mbps is considered to be unserved and thus eligible to receive Reconnect funding. And we looked at how families were behaving during the pandemic. You have children that are in school and parents that need to stream multiple videos. You have individuals that needed to a sustainable video connection to visit with their doctor. And so we knew that taking this leap into upping the threshold for what we consider to be basic service for Reconnect was necessary to meet not just today's rural communities' needs, but tomorrow's.
Well, that is really remarkable, Edgel, and I just applaud the USDA for making those steps to get there, because and just to repeat what you just said, 10/1 is unserved, 25/3 is unserved. You're saying that if you don't have 100/20, 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up, then you can apply as an unserved area for a Reconnect grant in this 3rd round. That's what you just said, right?
That's right. Areas are eligible.
Eligible. And that's kind of like, in some ways, even beyond where, IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there's a category of unserved. If you don't have 25/3, there's a category of underserved. If you don't have 100/20, you're basically raising the bar even more than that law with regards to Reconnect grant. And how is that being received at JAL? How are people reacting to that? Are recipients, hey, no problem, we're going to be doing that anyway? Or do you get some grousing and mumbling, well, we really wanted to do this type of project that we might not have been able to do with 120?
This 100/20 was also part of what we heard from commenters to our final rule of Reconnect.
Okay.
So stakeholders had already, been telling us, hey, 25/3 is not enough. And so that's where we decided, okay, we've heard, we've seen the reality of the pandemic, we've heard rural stakeholders, and in the last 2 rounds of Reconnect, we realized that a lot of the people, the entities that had received awards, they were already building to 100/20. So we knew that rural stakeholders were ready to take this leap, and that, we were responding to the needs of rural communities.
Well, these are great points, and I'm glad to hear this. And again, kind of maybe the timing's a little bit off in that the round was closed and you had to have it in today. But are there any other additional guidance you give for applicants of Reconnect, or is there going to be a 4th round? Right? You've just highlighted the $2 billion that is going to USDA from IIJA, correct?
That's right. So we are all, full steam ahead, closing this round, evaluating the applications that come in. I think the biggest pointer I can give to the audience and to any applicants is that you should build a relationship with your telecommunications general field representative. These are the individuals that know the lay of the land in the state that they oversee. They know the players. They can help you build relationships. They can guide you through our processes. They can explain the nitty-gritty details of our programs and help you think through, what programs are best for you at this moment, right? And what programs can help you build to the future. So that would be like my number 1 point is get to know your general field representative, and of course, contact us, right? Contact us at Contract Acting Administrator Cleese McLean, contact myself, the Assistant Administrator Laura Leverrier for our telecommunications programs. We're ready to have and want to have these conversations. And the other question you posed was about preparing for the funding that's coming down. So there's going to be another round. We'll share more information about that once we have that. But with the exciting additional funding that the IIJA or BIL, offered us, we're really excited to continue this work of providing broadband infrastructure in rural communities.
Do you have a time frame for how long that $2 billion is going to last, or over what period of time?
We're considering all options right now, and that's just in part because the round 3 closed today. Yes. And so we're really focused on wrapping this up.
Okay. Yeah. You said, and we certainly want to provide links on the page that this event is streamed and is hosted to all those contact points that you've mentioned there. But when you say that people should contact us and you can guide them to the programs, are they getting educated on the IIJA process for NTIA funding? Will they be able to inform potential applicants of the ways they should apply for those too?
We have great relationships with our outreach teams at NTIA as well. And so something that I've seen in my short time at USDA is that all of our, we're all really colleagues and working towards the same goal and as part of this big federal family, right? So whenever NTIA staff get a question about Reconnect, they're like, oh, let me put you in contact with folk over there. And they also uplift the various programs that we have. So we'll continue to do that. And something that we did, in fact, leading as part of the round of Reconnect is we have a lot of webinars, as you mentioned, and a lot of workshops for the Reconnect application specifically. I believe it was in the last 2 Reconnect workshops, we invited FCC representatives and NTIA representatives to talk to our Reconnect, hopeful applicants, right, about and to talk about how we're all collaborating, and so that folk know that we are just trying to support each other. So we'll continue to have those kind of interactions.
Well, we certainly welcome your questions online. We've got one here I want to ask. It's Cheryl DeBerry asks, kudos to increasing the threshold for minimum service. However, if an area was already funded under the old threshold, is there a way to encourage those grantees to increase their minimum speeds or allow new rounds to fund upgrades in previously funded areas?
So for this, thank you for that question. For this round of Reconnect, if an area does not have 100/20, but an entity has received funding to build 25/3, they can come and request funding from Reconnect to build 100/20. And so we look where there's already been investment. The team is looking very closely to make sure that we're collaborating and that we're building to that 120 or beyond, right? But yeah, absolutely. Entities, communities that don't have 100/20, even if they've received other funding, they can request and then show to us that that funding will be well used.
Mary Hastings asks, what about areas that have the higher threshold, but it is cost prohibitive for citizens to afford the higher threshold?
So Reconnect specifically focuses on building the infrastructure, on providing the funding. And if there's already connectivity over 120, then that area would not be eligible for additional funding from Reconnect to build the infrastructure. However, because this is an affordability question, I'd guide the participant to the FCC programs that focus more on affordability, like Lifeline or ACP, and those would be more the routes to bring down the cost.
Right. We've had other sessions on that program. The Affordable Connectivity Program used to be called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, which is kind of geared towards subsidizing the cost of broadband. Itchel, I'd love to ask your take on how we get broadband to some of the most remote areas, and in particular tribal areas. Could you talk a little bit about your work in this space? You're quite knowledgeable about this, and just tell us sort of what it's like getting broadband to these areas.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that question. I think it's a great question that we are addressing at USDA right now. And so I'll focus on what Rural Utility Service is doing. So early, I believe it was last March, the Office of Tribal Relations at USDA worked with our US and our Rural Development Mission area to host a series of listening sessions to learn more from tribes and tribal representatives about how we could improve our telecommunications programs. And several lessons came out from those listening sessions, right? We heard clearly from tribes that the matching requirement for some of our grant programs is prohibitive for their participation in our programs. We also heard that, sometimes carriers that want to serve a rural area don't actually collaborate with the tribe or don't follow tribal law when the carrier tries to deploy infrastructure within that jurisdiction, within the tribal jurisdiction. And so what we did, hearing that feedback directly from tribes with the support of the Office of Tribal Relations, in this round of Reconnect, we created a grant set aside for tribes and for socially vulnerable communities specifically. So we knew that our grants typically for Reconnect require 25% matching requirement. And we created a pot of funding, which was $350 million that would not require the awardee to match anything, right?
Got
So
it.
it was a completely 100% grant. And this pot of funding was for tribes and socially vulnerable communities. So I'm really excited to see how that was received. Now that our application is closed, right, we'll be looking at whether tribal applicants and those applicants that want to serve a socially vulnerable community stepped up and said, this is wonderful. We're also requiring for round 3 of Reconnect that anybody that wants to serve a tribal land is welcome to. We want all hands on deck to close the digital divide in remote and rural communities. And but anybody that's interested in serving a tribal land is required to show a resolution of consent from the tribal government of that land, right? And this was USDA stepping up to fulfill our responsibility to tribes and to observe and respect the sovereignty of tribes. And so we're really excited to see what came out of this round in the steps that we took to support deployment on tribal lands.
What kind of interaction do you and does USDA have with the Department of Interior, of course, where the Bureau of Indian Affairs is part of, and the FCC as well has numerous tribal windows in various spectrum proceedings, the 2.5 gigahertz proceeding. So what kind of coordination takes place in regards to tribal broadband issues?
Well, as we mentioned, we have great relations with our sister agencies, and when it comes to coordinating on tribal outreach and on tribal issues, we collaborate. We are in conversation a lot with Department of Interior. We learn a lot from what they do, and in conversation with the FCC. At Rural Development, we have a specific Native American national coordinator. His name is Ted Bulow. So if there are any applicants that want to serve, or anybody in your audience that is interested in serving tribal land.
Could you just repeat that name again?
Oh yeah, Ted Bulow.
Bulow?
Bulow. I might be mispronounced.
We'll get it on. We'll get it on the page.
Buelow.
All right, wonderful, wonderful.
But yeah, and so we have great, conversations with our federal partners and in trying to support access on tribal lands.
We're getting some more questions, so I want to get as many as we can from Felicity Behringer. How many Native groups have applied for Reconnect grants thus far? What are the results?
Right, thank you for that question, Felicity. I believe that in the past rounds, we've only had a handful of tribes specifically applying to Reconnect. I'd have to look more if there were also other internet providers that are tribally owned. But that's in part of why we wanted to increase our efforts in making sure that our programs were also accessible to those applicants.
I mean, just pushing back a bit or asking, I don't know if this is the right way to look at it, but I do wonder if you're an internet service provider and you want to try to get broadband to some tribal areas, is it possible that the tribe could be a gatekeeper and sort of slowing down the deployment of broadband? Or are you basically saying, well, actually they're not, or even if they are, we don't want anyone to build on tribal land without their permission?
Well, first, I don't think I've seen that situation unfold. But I also want to highlight that on tribal lands, that the tribal government has jurisdiction, right? So they are the ultimate deciders of who builds what where.
On rights of way matters, for example.
Right, they decide what happens on their land. And so at USDA, we are observing that, right? We are respecting that jurisdiction. And so I don't think that that prevents anybody from serving an area that is a tribal land. But I think it is something important to keep in mind is that you want to have good relations with the entities that will ultimately decide whether you get a permit to build land. So I think that it provides an opportunity to build your customer base, right? And so make sure that the plan that you're creating for your network is incorporating tribal government buildings, that you are serving the totality of the community and building those relationships. But we also recognize that tribes may sometimes would want to build the networks themselves. And so what we do at USDA is say, whoever wants to do it, go for it, submit, we're here to support efforts to provide the connectivity and to build the infrastructure. But we know that on tribal lands, like there has to be a good communication and relationship with the tribal government.
No, that certainly makes sense. We have more questions from Daniel Smith. He asks, what about quick, solid, fixed wireless now and fiber later? And maybe a bit general, but let me build on that. I mean, I think this is raising a great point. In fact, our discussion next week on Broadband Breakfast Live Online will be on should wireless internet service providers overbuild themselves, right? Because the notion here, and I'd love your thoughts on this, Edgel, is oftentimes the remotest areas, there is a higher use case or a higher cost to get fiber there. So the question is, can you get fiber quick? Can you get wireless sooner, but then still be doing the planning, the legwork for building out fiber and convert those customers to fiber customers later on? That's, I think, what Daniel's asking. What are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, at RUS, what we are doing is that we have these standards, right, to what we consider to be sufficient service. And we also have a construction standard of 100 over 100. And so any facility that is funded by, by Reconnect in the Reconnect program must be capable of providing of offering 100 over 100. That's what we are funding. That's our goal with the funds that we're distributing. And that was informed by the first two rounds. When we looked at the applicants and what they were building to that capability. So we knew that in rural communities, there was already an effort and a desire to fund a higher standard of service. And it doesn't have to be only with fiber, right? Like networks are, they can be configured in various ways. So you can use multiple technologies to develop a network that provides quality service.
Right.
And this is, if you allow me to jump back to where this is, I think, a great play where initiatives like the FCC's 2.5 window that allowed tribal entities to get a license for wireless service. That's a good way to consider what are the assets that I have right now to build the network. I will always need the backhaul, right? And but how can I use this license, for example, to provide the last mile service and maybe reconnect funding to build that backhaul service, right? So I think
can Reconnect funds be used for backhaul or not?
Well, Reconnect has to build the funds used for Reconnect have to provide end user service,
right?
But it doesn't mean that you can't
use the funds.
Use or use the license to be able to do that, right? And what we have seen also with Reconnect is that we have fiber projects everywhere.
Yeah.
So communities at rural providers are stepping up. They're providing service that meets our standards. They've been doing that for a while, and they can use a mix of technologies.
Okay. Well, maybe this is a critical question here. Philip Neufeld asks, does the 100 by 100 construction reduce the reach of service and the time to deliver service where radio frequency could deliver service quickly and then use it as an overlay for fiber long term? The 100 by 100 requirement becomes cost prohibitive for some rural regions, topographical areas, or even urban areas. What's your reaction to that, Joe?
I go back to what we just said, is that in a lot of rural communities, we're already ready to provide that. And we do recognize that it costs more money to build this higher threshold. Yes. So in the third round of Reconnect, we did include a possibility if you were requesting funding in a really remote area, and we defined that area in the funding announcement, then you could request up to $35 million for a grant. right? So we know that it is not cheap to build in rural communities, but we're also aware that, our US has been building infrastructure for decades.
Mhm.
We offer loans, we offer grants, we look at we do a feasibility study on the projects that come for Reconnect. So we want to make sure that we're funding things that can be, networks that can be built and that will be available to consumers. And so we look at that and provided additional funding where there are really remote areas.
Yeah, two areas I want to make sure we talk sufficient about here at GEL are mapping, broadband mapping, and the loans, right? And kind of the loan grant balance. Let's start with the mapping. So talk just a few moments about what systems USDA's RUS uses when a provider applies for Reconnect or another grant. What kind of maps do they need to provide? What kind of maps does USDA use? And what's your take on the whole controversy over the lack of address level specificity on broadband mapping?
Right. Well, that's a really important question, right? Especially as funding is being distributed to close the digital divide. We are at USDA. We do mapping in a unique way. So first, all the projects that we fund, we share the service area of where broadband will be provided with our federal partners. We let them know, hey, we're funding in this area. FYI, we're funding in that area. So we do have relationships, and we share information to coordinate funding with our federal partners. Part of that, we share information with NTIA for their National Broadband Availability Map. So I believe that in the NBAM, you would see reflected the funding that USDA has provided.
Okay, so just to be clear, for our audience, and we have discussed this at previous events on broadband mapping, there's the NTIA's NBAM, or National Broadband Availability Map, and then there's the FCC and the old, now retired National Broadband Map that presumably will get a much dramatic facelift with the new round of funding, or really the new round of mandate that there be address level broadband fabric, right? But the NTIA's map, this NBAM, is not a kind of consumer facing or even provider facing map. It's more of a government facing or state facing map. And you're saying that USDA information goes into the NBAM, correct? And who sees it? What happens as a result of going in there?
What this map helps other agencies learn where USDA has provided funding, so that we are all coordinating on where there is a need for broadband and to what capacity. Right. So that is one way in which we collaborate with our sister agencies, and we share our information of where provided funding, so that we all know what areas are left to provide service and to connect. The other unique thing that we do at USDA is that for Reconnect specifically, we have something called the service area validation process. So when an entity says, we are requesting funding from Reconnect to provide internet service in area X. They submit to us, this is the area that we want to serve. Once we receive that information, we post the map of the area on our website, and we invite providers out there to say, hey, let us know if you're already providing internet service here to our degree, right? So that kicks off a validation process where we do our own research of this project says they want to serve this area. Who's already providing service there? Is this area unserved? To what degree? Because for Reconnect, an area has to be 90% unserved in order to be able to receive funding. So
unserved by that 100 by 20 standard we just spoke about.
That's right. That's right. For this third round is unserved. 90% of the area has to not have service of 120, right? And so because, we take that application, we do our research, we also post that the service area for the public to comment and let us know. There might be a provider that's like, I'm already providing that service. They submit information. And if it comes to that, then to the point that we need to go in person, and this is where the GFRs are critical.
The field representatives.
The general field representatives, the telecommunications field representatives. If there is, the need to understand what level of service is there, then the field representatives visit the area and confirm whether there is service or not. And this is also that we make sure that we are providing funding where it's needed. And if somebody else is already providing service, then that the area likely won't be eligible.
So this validation, or sometimes it's called the challenge process, how has this worked in rounds 1 and 2 of Reconnect?
I think we had success in that process, in that carriers that were already present communicated to us, right? We have the formal process of receiving that information. And so it happens through our website, and which is also our Reconnect application portal. So I think we've been successful in that, in making sure that we were funding areas that needed the funding.
Do you have any sort of sense of magnitude for areas that were challenged, that were, kind of invalidated?
Yeah, I'd have to look back in detail, so, but I'd have to get back to you on that.
Speaking from, what one hears in the industry, that the problem with this challenge process is that someone can claim service when, they're not really doing it that well. And I think that by having 100 by 20 service as your benchmark, you're raising the bar, like I said earlier, so substantially that kind of at least could undercut that concern.
And I mean, I think when people say, hey, I'm already providing service, right, the GFR goes to confirm what kind of service is in this territory.
Yeah. Right. What are there any kind of examples that strike you? You've been for a year now at USDA, and so any kind of examples that occur to you of areas where a project was funded that just really made a huge difference in the lives of the people in that rural area?
Yeah, I mean, we have so many examples of that that we can give you, but one that jumps to mind right now is, I know that we are provided funding in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, right? And so that's where, to the point of building fiber in really difficult to reach areas. I mean, a lot of communities in Alaska are not connected even by road. So it takes extra effort to make sure that that those communities will get, quality connectivity. And so those are one of the funds that were really one of the projects that jumps out at me. It's so exciting to be part of an agency that is prioritizing quality infrastructure in rural communities, and we have been doing that since the 40s.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. Certainly we do have a few more moments for questions to come in if you have questions that you'd like to share with us. But I want to talk about this loan grant question that I raised earlier. So is it incorrect that USDA has traditionally primarily done loans? What has changed in terms of Reconnect and others offering grant funds? Could you just talk a little bit about the relative advantages of the two vehicles?
Right. Well, I know that we started, it varies by program, first of all, and it varies by our industry, right? Our electric programs are only loans.
Only loans for electric.
Right. Okay. Exactly. So if anybody wants to build electric infrastructure in rural communities, the tools at our disposal right now are only loans. And this is set by Congress, right? So Congress tells us you have loan or you have grant authority. In the broadband programs, I believe that we started with loans, and then we started getting grant programs like Community Connect. Those are all grants. Distance learning and telemedicine, those are all grants. Reconnect offers both. Reconnect allows us to offer both loans and grants. And to the point of what is the benefit of both? I mean, using, we're also a lender in the industry, right? So we want to make sure that rural providers that want to build the infrastructure and provide the service have access to our funding in the form of loans. And the loan funds that we provide are over decades, right? So we do heavy or I would say substantial economic feasibility study. We look into how that awardee is going to use the loans, the success of the project, the projected success of the project. And that's a really good option for entities that are able to utilize loans as a tool. One benefit of the loans is that they're non-competitive. So first come, first serve, right? You show up, you say, I want a loan, we get a very good interest rate. They get the funding and they go on. And build it. And we do, for Reconnect, we have a 5-year construction timeline. So anybody that receives funding from Reconnect must build their infrastructure within 5 years.
So let me just make sure I got this straight. So sure. For loans, no competition. You just get there, meet the requirements. How much is available for loans?
In this round that just closed today, I believe we made $250 million available for loans.
And how much for grants?
There was a total of $700 million available for grants. And then we have the loan and grant combination, which is 50-50. So you say, okay, I want a 50% loan and 50 grant. I think that was 250.
Okay.
As well.
Okay.
So, I believe so.
But the point I guess I'm raising is that you do have to hit the windows, right? You do have to apply within the window, right. But the loan might be attractive for that reason.
Exactly, and you might not want it gives you more flexibility on I think as a carrier. One of the advantages of grants is that, of course, we are working in the most remote, communities, and often those communities don't have a lot of resources, right? And so grants are extremely important for rural communities to be able to participate and get the funding necessary. And so for grants, they are competitive. So you are competing with other people that want that grant money as well. And we, again, because we are financing infrastructure that will be there for decades, we look, substantially at the feasibility of the project, technical, financial. And for this round of Reconnect, we offered $700 million in grants. This is the most we ever offered in a single window. 350 of those were for grants that have a 25% match. Right. And then the other 350 were for no match for tribes and socially vulnerable communities.
We've got another question here. This is from Catherine Rice. What is Reconnect's definition of served? Is it that a wire can be installed within X days, or that a home already has a physical connection? Is it also that a service is advertised to have 100 by 20, or that there is a subscriber proven that there is 100 by 20 being paid for?
So what we look at is whether 90% of the homes in the area have access to 120 or not.
Access meaning they can get it right then, not within 10 days, because that was always an issue.
I'll have to look at if there's like a specific day requirement there, but whether they have access to 110.
Okay. We have just 2 minutes left.
Sure.
I want to give you an opportunity to speak about these other programs, like we sort of skirted over them, Community Connect and these kind of the adoption and use piece of it, right? So how much of your work in broadband at RUS is on the infrastructure versus the kind of making sure people know how to use it and have the tools there?
Right. So our programs are primarily infrastructure. Right? We know that rural communities are sadly often the last to get served, and that the mission of the rural utility service is to provide funds to build that infrastructure that is sorely needed, right? So the 4 out of the 5 programs that we have focus on building infrastructure in some way. We have the programs that are loan only and that they have various requirements of population, but mostly our funding is available in communities that are 20,000 people or less. And either the community has to be fully unserved, like absolutely no service, or 90% unserved, and depending on what Congress indicates for that particular funding. But we really focus on the least served communities in the country. And so what we do is primarily focus on building that infrastructure. It could be that an experienced carrier wants a loan and they want to use our Reconnect or our other loan programs, or it could be that a community says, hey, we want to provide service in this community center. The community likes to gather there, and if they had internet access there, it would be really helpful for the community. So maybe a nonprofit or a group of like engaged rural community members want to do something about it, and they put together a Community Connect application.
Right.
Where the program that is more about connectivity is this distance learning and telemedicine program. And we've seen some really incredible projects in that program that usually, could be hospitals, nursing facilities, schools, community colleges that want to, tribal colleges that want to extend their distance learning capability or offers telemedicine services. I've seen some projects that would offer telepsychiatry to the local community, right, where it was not available. So DLT is an excellent program for that.
The distance learning telemedicine.
Right, and the distance learning. I've seen some distance learning projects where I think it was a school wanted to provide classes for a certificate on welding that could only be, the community couldn't attend during 9 to 5 hours, so they provided it in the evenings and weekends. So that's a kind of impact that the distance learning and telemedicine program can have.
Well, wonderful. Anything else you'd like to say?
No, I mean, it's been really fun talking to you, getting to know you, and talking with you about the incredible work of Rural Utility Service. We're really excited that the window closed. We're not excited that it closed. We're happy that the competition happened.
Exactly.
And we look forward to more conversations.
Well, and on behalf of our wonderful guest, Edjael Peralta, of the Rural Utility Service, we are so grateful to those of you who have watched with us. We are going to be back here next Wednesday, as every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time, with a discussion about should wireless internet service providers overbuild themselves. And we look forward to next month, April 13th. We hope we'll be able to see you here at Clyde's and welcome Alan Davidson of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. On behalf of Edjael and all of you, I'm Drew Clark, Broadband Breakfast. See you next week. Take care.